Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition of Indexer Office Hours. Today is the 21st of January and this is Indexer Office Hours 191. For anyone who is new to Indexer Office Hours, this is the town square where graph ecosystem participants come together and discuss the most important and relevant topics for indexes. As always, I love to say this, and today is no different. This is a conversation, and we do love participation, so do get involved in today's conversation. It's going to be an engaging one where we have Rem, who's going to be joining us for protocol economics, telling us about the future of the economics for the protocol. So yeah, would love as much engagement and questions as possible. It's going to be a fun session. As a reminder, this is a session that's going to be recorded and posted onto public channels like YouTube. So as always, if you are concerned about privacy, please bear that in mind. And with that, let's get into today's exciting agenda. Okay, so I always give a shout out to the latest GRT IQ episode. But today we actually have the same episode as last week, so I won't say too much. It's episode 203 with Justin Bannon, who is the founder of Boson Protocol. All the links and descriptions are in the agenda, so go ahead and check it out. Since nothing has changed, I won't go too much detail. Thanks for sharing. Same link as last week. Thanks for sharing, Juan. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nick. Is getting late. Lol. Yes, we need to crack the whip there with Nick. I don't know what's going on. I'm sure he's fine. I'm sure he's busy. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Anna for our regularly scheduled Repo Watch section. Good to have you back, by the way. Good to have you back.
Thank you for covering me last week as well.
You're very welcome.
Okay, so Repo Watch. On execution layer clients, today we have had 2 new releases from Firehose Ethereum. So version 2.9.0, which is a bunch of updates and breaking changes. Some of the new features include enhanced configuration options for substreams tier 1 to balance active requests across instances, some new Prometheus metrics for tracking rejected requests, and some improved HTTP compression support for browser clients. There are some quality of life adjustments for the FireEat tools and the Reader Node Manager API, and an important breaking change here. So with this release, Firehose enforces gzip and ZSTD compression for client connections by default, which means it rejects uncompressed requests unless a specific flag is used. Also, support for legacy SF Firehose v1 protocol has been removed. In terms of urgency for this release, this is a high urgency for users relying on uncompressed Firehose connections. Then here we also have version 2.9.1, which reintroduces gRPC Health v1 Health service for Firehose and substreams. This service was removed in the previous version. And then it also prioritizes the use of xCloud trace context tracing to prevent trace ID leakage beyond GCP load. We have nothing new. And on the graph stack, we have a new service release. So this is version 0.22.0, which enhances functionality with support for local querying of epoch and tab subgraphs, improves action state management, and addresses pending graphs handling. These updates all optimize performance and fix existing errors, but they're not critical to operations. And then we also have a new release of Indexer Service Rust version. So this is version 1.4.1, which addresses bugs related to check health serialization and header retention in attestation middleware. you should update this release as soon as you can, but again, it's not a red urgency indicator. So Pinax upgraded to new Firehouse 291 already, which sounds like it all went well. And then Matthew's also asking, what do people think of Aragon 3? We haven't, we as in GraphOps haven't yet tried Aragon 3, so I don't have an opinion there, but also interested to know what people are thinking. And that's all I have for this week, so over to you, Juan.
Thanks, Anna. Okay, getting into Protocol Watch. We don't have a ton to cover, so I'll be brief. For forum governance, we have the 3 GDRs, that is 24, 25, and 22. All of their resolutions have been already executed. That the summary is that 24 is a draw, 25 and 22 are slashes. 25 because there was no response for a long while, so no response, eventually it's a slash. 22, there was not enough evidence to say that it was a bug, so it was essentially negligence, so to speak. And 24, again, it's a lengthy discussion, so it was a draw and a few recommendations for the charter to be amended and cover those important new details. Forum research, we don't have any new updates since last IOH. For the contracts repository, we have 2 open PRs. That is, one is a fix, so a cleanup to the tab collector authorization already revoked contract, and then a chore to update ignition to a new version. And for the network subgroups, we don't have any new updates since last IOH, and that's pretty much it for Protocol Watch. I'm gonna be handing over to 𝗨𝗂𝗟 now.
Amazing. Any updates from Paca on GraphNode? Is Paca in the crowd? I see Kate is here, but no.
I didn't see Paca, so that's why I handed over to you.
But yeah, that's a good point. Okay, all right. I'm gonna try to get a hold of Paca and ask about updates. Coming very soon. Oh, okay. Mickey, do you want to chime in? Maybe if you have any additional context there, or is that all that you have in terms of context? Let us know if you have any additional. It would be great. Okay, I see Mickey's typing. Feel free to unmute as well, whatever is easiest for you, or typing. Okay, fair enough. Okay, no worries. I'll reach out to Paco so we can get an update soon. Okay, great. Thanks so much, everyone. Yeah, thanks so much, Mickey. Appreciate you for sharing the context, and yeah, enjoy the burrito. Okay, great. So as alluded to earlier in the conversation, if you guys were here to hear it, we have the good fortune of inviting Rem back to IOH. We had a very fruitful and engaging conversation about protocol economics, and of course, this is a huge. Where's my burrito? We have a huge. It's a huge change, right? It's going to be a fundamental change to the protocol. So we figured it would make sense to have several conversations on this. So this is, I guess, a follow-on from the one we did in 2024. So without further ado, Rem, feel free to take the stage. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Of course, I have to. Can you hear me, by the way? I'm getting slightly strange audio effect.
Yes, actually, quite clearly. Yeah.
Good.
Your sound's coming in pretty good. Yeah.
Okay, good. So the last time I was here, as 𝗨𝗂𝗟 pointed out, I basically introduced this post. So I'm not going to go over the material of the post itself, just a little bit of context in case someone missed it. We did discuss what all the different participant needs were in the last call. And what I am going to do today is actually focus more on talking through the GIP itself. This is GIP 0070, and it's an overarching GIP covering protocol improvements. Now, before I carry on, does the I've lost the chat. I just wanted to make sure I'm following any chats. Yep. Okay, great. Thank you. You've posted that.
Yep. And also, if questions come through, I will label them as questions, and then whenever you want to pause, I will just direct you to the question. So don't worry about the chat. I've got it.
Great. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got to where we are, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about how the protocol works currently. For many of you, this is probably very well known, but I think it's important to have a little bit of context and understand where the pieces are that I'm talking about. So of course, the protocol, it indexes data and it serves data for consumers and they pay query fees. And of course, we also have curators who curate on data so that the indexers know what to index. The indexers allocate and index the data. We have delegators, of course, and they delegate. That helps the indexers as well with their allocation. And then finally, we have the protocol, and the protocol issues indexing rewards. I'm not going to explain that in detail. You probably know it. But what I wanted to point out here is that this collectively is an integrated, coherent set of mechanisms. They were all designed to work together and to balance each other. And they've done a pretty good job of that in many ways. We have now found some areas where we want to improve things, but basically, overall, there is a good balance in the protocol. And when it comes to the proposal, this is actually one of the key objectives, one of the key goals of the proposal is that we need to maintain this network balance. And this comes in a couple of key areas. One, and I'm not sure how clearly, I'll just explain a little bit. I've got the aspects coming down on the right-hand side, and I'm highlighting with a little white border the protocol aspects that are relevant to what I'm talking about. So the indexing rewards are distributing issuance to ensure that indexing occurs and that the network remains healthy. And this isn't something we should necessarily take for granted. This is something we need to make sure is maintained. And it was one of the things that became a bit of a question mark with some of our horizon change as well. How were we going to maintain that? So we know we need to maintain that. The second is, I kind of mentioned this before, but there are integrated role incentives to holistically balance the network. So everything we do needs to have that design for balance across how the mechanisms work, not just thinking of mechanisms in isolation. And one relevant area, we're introducing indexing fees. For very good reasons. As it stands, indexing fees and the sponsors who are paying the indexing fees, it's not part of this holistic balance, right? So that is one of the things we actually need to solve. Now, moving on from maintaining what we have, the next major goal of the whole proposal is to enhance incentive alignment. So if we look at what happens on the network, and this is an approximation, you can kind of see what's happening in the whole indexing rewards, curation space, etc., isn't as strongly connected to what's happening in the consumer and query fees space as we would like. You can, and people do a lot of playing around with how much you curate and allocate, etc., to earn indexing rewards without necessarily ever serving any data. And this is, a problem for the network long term. It hasn't really been so much of a problem up to now because our traffic has been pretty low. But as traffic ramps up, and we've got a lot of plans to expand the scope of the network, and we expect traffic to be ramping up, we need to make sure that we've got alignment here. So currently, network rewards are not linked to the consumer value delivered. It's essentially how I summarize that. Now, by the way, anyone has any questions, please do feel free to stop me and ask. But it looks, I can see someone typing, but so far no questions per se. Okay. Now, the other, yeah, so I already started talking through this, but you can curate, get indexing rewards without necessarily delivering consumer value. Now, the next point I'm going to say is limited incentives for network contribution to consumer value. So it's not just these particular incentives that aren't quite aligned as well as we want. There are other things we want to do on the network. A really obvious one is indexing fees. And currently there's no link between indexing fees and the current query fees we have. So I've made query fees red to represent there's an issue there. And indexing fees themselves are disconnected. It's like another area of incentives that, and it's one that we've introduced rather than one that existed, but it's now, of course, you might have noticed I've got an extra free. And basically, there is a set of activity that we want to happen on the network. To some degree, it already does. To some extent, it's new activity, but it's not covered by the incentives we currently have. And I'll sort of in the middle summarize this as to do with spaces or services and modules. So modules can be subgraphs and substreams or any other type of data service we generate, the modules associated to that. You rolled back to the previous version. Oh, great. Now, so I think there was a thing audio changed. I'm going to keep going unless someone says there's still a problem. Okay. So this comes from two sides, right? This comes from what I might say the builder side. We have builders who are defining and building and integrating this. This is developers, whether it's creating a subgraph or a substream, or whether it's actually creating a whole new data service. We have people building things. We should also have, this should become a bigger feature than it is currently, people contributing. So this can be contributing to a space on the knowledge graph, but there are other places they can contribute as well. Now, it's outside the scope of this proposal to talk about how all of that is going to happen. But we do need to make sure that we're able to incentivize that. And that comes into the way that the protocol evolution is being proposed. Okay, moving on from the enhanced side, I'm just going to go into the final sort of big goal is sustaining continuous improvement. Kind of first point there is basically we know there are these different things that we want to incentivize, and we need to somehow balance issuance to happen between those so that happens in a fair and reasonable way. We also need to make sure that everything we're doing is planning for setting us up for the long-term sustainability of the graph, including, for example, after foundation vesting ends. Any questions on that? That's basically me covering the goals side of it, right? That's meant to be the explanation. These are the major goals, the reasons why. You can see we've ended up with quite a few red boxes. And now from the proposal side, going to try and show how we intend to address that. Okay, So from the
No
proposal
questions.
side,
Oh, sorry. I was just responding to your question there. You said no questions thus far, but I'll just keep an eye out if there are any.
does anyone want me to slow down or speed up? I'm going reasonably quickly at the moment. I'm sort of expecting there to be questions, so I don't want to spend too much time just talking, but if you want me to go a little bit slower, I can do so. Okay. From the proposal side, maintaining the network balance, and this linking, the indexing rewards are directly multiplied by the allocation. This will be addressed with the indexing fees. It's not actually linked to indexing fees. So the indexing rewards are multiplied by the proportion of allocation versus total allocation. You're correct, and that will be addressed. But indexing fees is a different mechanism. I'll try and avoid going into it now because that will become a whole conversation of its own right. Okay, so for maintaining the network balance, sort of right on cue, indexing rewards do need to change. And the proposal is essentially saying what we want to do is we want to start distributing it through a combination of two things. On one side, we'll introduce something called network payments. And on the other side, the closest thing to indexing rewards be a little bit different. We call it network rewards. Now, the intent here is I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on all the individual points here, but the network rewards still maintain a baseline function of network health, making sure indexes can join the network, making sure we can see the quality of service being offered, which we didn't see which we didn't have in indexing rewards, and making sure that the right level of work, if you like, is being done by the network. Now, network payments are sort of a bit of a complement where the network, the indexes in this case, will actually be paid directly by a mechanism from issuance using the same mechanisms that anyone else could, like a sponsor doing indexing payments, paying indexing fees, etc., and a consumer issuing queries. And the reason for that is it achieves a similar outcome in terms of making sure the right data is indexed, but it also means that we can actively monitor quality of service, and we can change the dynamics of the market slightly and take the indexes out of needing to try and predict where they will be useful to having the network ask the indexes to do the work that they are predicted to be necessary for. The second big change here is there will be a change to the query fees, to the cuts made. One of the issues with the original protocol was, can I please go in deep because it's the most important item for us at the moment. I can't, sorry. Not in this call, so let me rephrase that. I'm very happy to go in deep, but that'll probably be another call. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is actually I don't have all the material ready to discuss, and two, each of these items in itself will be quite a chunky discussion. So if you like, you can see I'm on the second point of what will be 6. And there's a few other things to cover as well. And each of those could potentially be an entire discussion for which I don't have all the material ready yet for either. And yes, absolutely, I'm happy to keep having these discussions and going into detail, but I'll just offer you my apologies at this point. I'm not going to go into the details on this call because I don't think there's enough time and I don't have the material ready. Is that clear? Okay, so query fees. So the way cuts work on query fees have changed. The original protocol had fixed cuts, and I think one of the observations I have is that actually fixed cuts, which are quite significant, it's almost like expecting a clock that is stopped to be correct, right? A broken clock is correct twice per day. Fixed query fee cuts are only occasionally at the right level. So part of what's going to happen is the query fees will be dynamically determined by the participants, and there'll be a little broader in scope in what they can cover. So when someone pays for indexing as a sponsor, that's like, yeah, I'm in danger of going too deep too early. I'll leave it for that because I'm actually covering this in a slightly later point. I'll just say now, for now, the query fees are changing. This in turn contributes to being able to incentivize contribution and collaboration by contributors. The actual mechanism is not in scope of this proposal, but it's something that becomes possible. Now, enhancing the incentive alignment. So the first thing is, I started talking a little bit about indexing fees as part of query fees. So we take the sponsor and we more formally define this as a role and give the sponsor an incentive that optimally matches indexing with demand. And this does look a lot, it's a little bit like curation, except you're directly paying for the indexing. So for whoever actually pays for the indexing, over time they can get repaid in return for doing so. And it allows the network to self-balance. I should also note that the cut that goes to this self-balances according to market demand. Next point, curation as an indirect sponsor using issuance. There is a little bit more detail on some of these points in the proposal itself, by the way, rather compared to what I'm discussing today. But curation was in the original protocol. One of the things people had really recognized was not functioning the way it should. I actually considered, I had a previous draft version of this proposal where I didn't call it curation anymore. But actually, after working through it, it does do what curation was originally meant to do. But the mechanism is a little different. So the new curation mechanism, the curators are still locking their GRT. What they're locking that GRT for and how that GRT flows becomes a bit more specific. They specifically lock for what they want. A certain amount of issuance becomes available, and that issuance effectively is used to sponsor indexing or do some other activity that curation can perform. The other thing that will change is, as with all of these mechanisms, they are designed to be quite open and synergistic, by which I mean they have more than one application. So the original network was thinking about indexing and indexing fees. We are now thinking a bit more broadly about the other activities on the network, like what happen in knowledge graph spaces. So curation becomes an activity that can be performed not just to get data indexed, but can also be done to get content written for the knowledge graph or potentially other things happening on the network. That's represents curation being fixed, but also note that part of that, basically, we now have the incentive mechanisms to cover these last two boxes, the space, service, module, etc., and define, build, and integrate of the builders. Again, everything in this column is not in the scope of this proposal, but we are proposing a baseline protocol that can support a variety of different activity. I'll pause briefly. I can't see any questions, so I am going to carry on. The final 2 points are about the sustaining continuous improvement. We've got quite a few different mechanisms at play here. It's actually very important that those are balanced, just like my comment with with query fee cuts, that if you set a fixed fee cut, it's only going to be an appropriate cut for a small proportion of the time. If we hard code any particular balance of issuance, I think that would be a mistake. I think the protocol needs to self-balance, and I think it has to self-balance through how people are locking their GRT. And the final point here, and I know this will be one which will be of great interest. I'll spend, unless there are loads of questions already, I'll spend a little bit longer on this one, I think. So we want to taper the subsidy based on external income to match network needs. So currently it's indexing rewards. It's going to be called network rewards. But essentially, there are issuances used as being a subsidy to sustain and build the network. And we're dependent on it, right? We can't stop that at this stage. It is, however, a subsidy. So we need to plan in a transparent way that everyone understands how the mechanism is going to work, and with some transparency and predictability, how it changes over time from being a subsidy purely for indexing to a more general subsidy. And the way this is intended to work, and there's a little bit more detail on the proposal itself than I'm actually talking through on the call today, is that as the external income grows, it makes sense that the dependency on issuance to subsidize the network decreases over time. And I haven't fixed exact parameters yet. I think this is a discussion that where a lot of people can contribute, but probably a reasonable middle of the ground is that if there is an extra, 10 million of external income flowing into the network, so with external income, we might mean it might be query fees. Query fees is probably the largest source of it. That is paid by people external to the network, right? So it's not issuance paying this 10 million in query fees. It's coming from elsewhere. But if the external income grows by 10 million, we can probably decrease the subsidy by a bit, and I think a reasonable proportion is probably half. So we say, okay, the external income increased by 10 million, so the amount of the subsidy decreases by 5 million. The index network is still earning more than it was previously. It's still earning 5 million more, but we'll also, in a gradual, transparent way, weaning ourselves off that being a subsidy just for indexing and being able to use it for other purposes. Any questions at this stage?
Any question, folks? It's a lot of really useful information, and I'd imagine, I mean, it's going to affect a lot of us going forward. So, okay, cool. I see Marc-Andre typing. And Ensign as well. Great. Awesome.
Excellent. I'll just wait to... What might other purposes be? So one is content on the knowledge graph. And that's probably the really obvious one that we know about now. But actually, when it comes to long-term sustainability of the network, we can't necessarily predict all of the future things that we're going to do. There must other things can potentially come up as well that the network will need to decide what's important. But if we are committed to using it just for one purpose, then we don't really have that flexibility. And I think having that flexibility and being able to invest in other areas of the network is in all of our best interests, because ultimately our long-term success relies on the success of the overall network. So on self-balancing, I hope that answered the other purposes question. On self-balancing issuance based on staking size, can you share some figures of what you have in mind so we can understand the direction and the impact you're looking for? Okay, so yes. If you look at the amount of locked GRT currently, so there's about 2.5 billion locked GRTs the last time I looked. Sorry, for a combination of stake, self-stake, and delegation. And if you like, that what's currently 2.5 billion can largely be regarded as being one bucket that determines what should be going to this network rewards and network payments or indexing rewards before the transition bucket. Duration currently, last time I looked, was like about 7 or 8 million as opposed to billion. So it's like a huge, it's almost 1,000th. Well, the 1,000th in magnitude. I guess it's like more like 300 times or something like that, right? The amount of curation is currently tiny. Now, that's probably partly because the amount of external queries are tiny as well. To be fair, there's a factor there. But if we start saying for the self-balancing issuance, okay, the proportion based on this bucket of stake, including delegation, is one bucket versus the proportion of the new curation mechanism, which can direct things towards the knowledge graph or as well as to indexing and other places and potentially in the future. But let's take the knowledge graph as an interesting case, because that's a bucket that's not going to indexes, whereas if the curation is for indexing fees, it's coming back to indexes anyway. Now, so because it's so small, we're talking like a tiny, much less than 1% of the issuance would now start to be redirected to other purposes. Now, if a whole lot of people become very interested in this and start curating, then that share would grow. And there's probably two interesting categories to think of there, because I do think this is probably, I don't think today will be the last conversation on this. I think you'll find this a very interesting conversation that you have a stake in, quite literally, right? But if that extra demand for curating on the knowledge graph is net new demand, then it has no negative impact on indexes in effect. Because actually, because the demand is going up, if the supply is fixed, right, marginal demand versus marginal supply, actually the proportion that goes to indexes keeps the same value. It doesn't change in value. It's less GRT, but that GRT is worth more and has the same value. In the meantime, of course, anyone who's actually holding GRT is happy. But leaving that side benefit aside, which is a significant side benefit, leaving it aside, ignoring that, the network would be neutral towards indexes if it was net new demand. There is another scenario to consider, which is actually it's not net new demand. It's actually existing delegators. So you're not changing the amount, if you like. It's existing delegators saying, actually, I'd rather curate than delegate. And that is a risk factor that I have in mind, that I will be designing the initial ways that protocol works to mitigate against, if you like. Because what I don't want to happen is that if 90% of delegators decide they want to curate instead, that the index income drops. That's not the intent. So, Marc-Andre, does that kind of answer your question? And you can probably start to get the feel for why I say each of these boxes each of these proposal boxes on the right-hand side can be a discussion.
Yeah, I think I'm getting the general idea. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I see someone's typing a question. I'm going to keep moving a little bit with just putting things into context and wrapping up, but I'll come back to any questions that come up. So sort of the concluding thing is, remember I started saying it was balanced and integrated, but you could see there were gaps and things that were not in scope. We're now getting back into an end state where actually everything is holistically balanced and coherent, all the pieces fit together, and we've addressed the incentive alignment gaps. I'm now going to just so I'll quickly look at Vince's question. So has there been any hard numbers done that if we flip the magic switch today, what would the net negative be to indexes income with current query volumes and stake, if any? Ignoring the positive aspects of changes proposed. So based on current numbers, it's less than 1%. What I can never predict completely is other changes in network demand. But if we took the way people have locked GRT currently and changed it to this new mechanisms, actually there would be a less than 1% drop in terms of how much of the total issuance pool is going to indexes. But it should be noted that even less than 1% enables us to start prototyping new mechanisms and piloting how things work. So it's actually useful for the network overall. Anyway, I'm going to switch slightly from this, which is sort of explaining the why parts, to putting it together. And you're we'll see this is starting to look more similar to diagrams that are in the proposal itself in the GIP, if you've read it. Basically, the first two items on here are about maintaining network balance. The second two were really focused on enhancing incentive alignment, and the third was about sustaining continuous improvement. If you wanted to simplify the proposal to 3 themes, those are the 3 themes. It's about maintaining the network balance, enhancing incentive alignment, and sustaining continuous improvement. Then on the design side, and this gets a little bit complex with all the arrows involved, but there were 3 design principles that I haven't talked about that are in the proposal. One, everything should be synergistic open primitives. If you like, this is actually something inspired a little bit by the changes that Horizon made versus the original protocol. The original protocol was quite fixed in its design. Horizon, along with World of Data Services, started opening that up and saying, actually, we create these contracts, etc., that can be used in multiple ways. We don't dictate or try and predict all of the ways that they will be used. And this is carrying on that path. All of the mechanisms are designed to work together, but to be quite versatile. The second point is actually we need to be really focused on consumer value alignment. So in all of the design aspects, pretty much all of the things, you can see there's lots of links here, right? Quite core to it is we need to design the network to deliver values to consumers, because that is what will make the network successful in the long term. And then the final thing, and again, you can see how interlinked these are. We can't try and predict and set fixed cuts or anything like that. We actually need to allow the ecosystem to adjust itself over time to where the demand is, to satisfying that demand and making sure there's the right balance between, indexing as an obvious one, between demand for specific indexing in specific regions, even, for example, versus the supply, etc. And bring it all together, you can see why it becomes very confusing. It looks like everything's connected to everything. It's not quite true. There are some exceptions, but the design principles are very interconnected and quite central to everything that's happening. Now, I'm going to wait for questions. It looks like there are not a lot of questions at this stage.
Forgive me, because I was writing a message as I was earlier. Did you respond to Vince's question?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I was just unsure because I was writing a message. Sorry about that.
No problem. Good to check. So the final bit I'll go through. So if you just push it to the left slightly and looking at the proposal aspect, I kind of alluded to this before, but actually there's intended to be a GIP associated with each of these. So with the first point, there's a GIP being planned to migrate from indexing rewards to network payments and network rewards. For the second one, there's a GIP being planned for a network payment cut framework to incentivize decentralized value creation. For the third one, again, GIP planned, embed incentives for sponsors of capability building to balance supply. And you can see this is carrying on, right? A GIP for curation as an indirect sponsor, a GIP to implement upgraded curation and distribute issuance based on locked GRTs. That's kind of coupled in that. And finally, a GRP for how the tapered subsidy transition for long-term sustainable network growth. So where I needed to apologize earlier because I know it's an important question. You can see the GIP that really fully answers that question hasn't been written yet, hasn't been published yet. I am busy drafting material for these, but of course, as these develop, I think each of these will deserve a conversation in index office hours, and I'd love your input into these. And I should note, please do participate on the forum, etc. if you have any ideas. I've spent a lot of time thinking on these issues and how to solve them. I've talked to a lot of people, but I don't have all the answers. And many aspects of the design have changed a few times as things are tried out and they don't work. And I expect some aspects will still change in future.
Just want to highlight that we're getting some positive sentiment in the chat from Pierre. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. He's just saying that he likes the direction that things are going, or this is going. So yeah, good to hear that. Oh wow, thanks, Louis.
I'll just switch back to the screen in case that's a better one to ask questions for. But it looks like there are surprisingly few questions. I know you often allow time to go over if required, but I've basically said everything I need to from my presentation point of view. Now, happily keep answering questions for a few minutes if required. And yes, Slim Chance, thank you for highlighting that again. There's quite a lot of material in that post. In one way, I have to apologize for its length, but I also thought it was important to actually talk through the detail with anyone who's interested in having a look and contributing. And like I say, I'll repeat again, I would love more contribution. Please do have a look and participate.
Yes, and never apologize for giving too much context. I think it's much better to give sufficient context, and then because that way people can dive as deep as they want, as opposed to the other way around. So yeah, we do appreciate you sharing all the details. All right, folks, we've got the last couple of minutes. I mean, we've got a lot of information here. So, if you have any questions, fire away. This is a fantastic time to do it. You've got Rem, the author of the actual post, here with us. So, yeah, fire away. I mean, it sounds like it's a lot of information. I do accept that. But as I said, it should be something to chew on. So, folks, if you have any questions, fire away. I appreciate the round of applause there. That's great. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any, or I am seeing a few bits of typing, but they seem to be kind of congratulating you, Rem. So I will take this opportunity, to also congratulate you and thank you for joining us today. Yeah, I'm surprised we finished on time. That's great. I was assuming that we would spill over because this is obviously a very important topic, but I think what it is, if I can assume, is that this is a lot of information and a lot of people need time to perhaps really digest. And so, yeah, the recording will be live very shortly, which you can always check. Of course, this is a very, very, very important topic that's going to affect all of us. As Rem was alluding to earlier, we all have stake in what's going to be happening here in the coming months. And years, and et cetera, as the protocol evolves economically. So yeah, do have your voice heard. This is the best place to do it, IOH and the forum, of course. Any final words, Rem, before we wrap today's conversation?
Thank you very much.
Alrighty, wonderful. Thank you. Really do appreciate you for coming through and of course giving us all the context and detail. I do appreciate how much in the weeds you do get into with the topics that you discuss. So yes, thank you very much. And also thank you very much to everyone else who's joined us today. And we'll see you again same time next week for more wonderful discussions. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye-bye.